The desire to make images move, the need to capture movement, I think this is a mystical urge. It's an attempt to capture the mystery of who and what we are, and then contemplate that mystery.
Hello, welcome to Vibration Cinema, the ultra destiny of film. Today, we are getting into cinema and the art of movement, how movies play with, distort, and celebrate motion, which I call Kine-aesthetics. Now, because I pulled this term out of my ass, I get to define it, and this video is going to chart how I came to coin it. I want to start with etymology. Kineaesthetics is a play on words. It's a homonym with kineaesthetics, the study of body motion. And as we've mentioned before, motion studies were instrumental in the development of film. It's worth noting here, too, that the root meaning of cinematography is writing with motion. But we've come to use cinematography to mean relaying story information visually or to affect particular moods visually, which are valid but limiting to the potentiality of what can be done with camera and lighting. As discussed in primitive cinema, digital cinema, narrative cinema pushes other methods to the margins, and cinematography as a motion art is yet another example. Cameras compress time and space, and of course motion requires time and space, so all movies inherently manipulate motion. This is not what I'm referring to with Kine-aesthetics. Kine-aesthetics is where you tool this manipulation to expressive ends. So that means that the Futurists and the Dadaists, though important to Kine-aesthetics, do not count. There's a joy of looking, and the rhythm pictures can be fun to watch for a minute or two, but the practitioners like Hans Richter were pretty adamant about moving against meaning. They were abstract in that sense. So these films are movement for movement's sake. And I do think that these films have a lot to teach us about liquidity and visual agility, which are sorely missing in our talking heads, over-the-shoulder, standard coverage style of cinema today. I think this is where they can be valuable for kineaesthetics, to get us to think about motion outside of the realm of simple metaphor or beyond presenting a character's mental state. Films like Rhythmus 21 are important to understand Kine-aesthetics, but don't qualify because they aren't meant to mean anything.
But then, I wasn't interested anymore in the subject as such, but more in the articulation on the canvas. So I tried, after I had discarded the subject, I tried to articulate musically on the canvas, black against white, so that finally I could organize the canvas also without any representational subject. The relationship between forms on the canvas is a rhythmical relationship. And rhythm, in my opinion, is the essence of filmmaking, because it's the articulation, the conscious articulation of time. And if anything is at the bottom of filmmaking, it is the articulation of time, of movement.
At the 1992 Black Popular Culture Conference, Arthur Jafer presented 69, in which he outlines Black visual intonation, which is using non-metric frame rates to visually approximate the ways in which a singer intones their voice. He suggests hand crank cameras as a way to easily vary the speed at which images are captured to approximate this. AJ has been a major influence on Kine-aesthetics as a practitioner of using the machinations of cinema to play with our perceptions and understanding of motion. This is adjacent, of course, to the Kino Glass, so with Black visual intonation, we have the manipulation of motion tooled towards political and cultural effect, which I think can fall under what we're considering Kine-aesthetics.
I sort of described this to somebody, it's like Usain Bolt. He's the fastest man in the world. It's amazing to see him run from here to there. But, if you shoot him at 120 frames per second and you slow him down and you see the way the muscles are shifting in relationship to each other, you don't just get the speed of the thing, you just see it. So it's like, in a way, it's almost like, how they do things and they do carbon dating on things, carbon dating. It's kind of like using one of the basic tools of cinema, which is oversampling the motion in a way to try to create the equivalent of that, so that the parts of Black American music, what we typically would call soul, or the soulfulness of those things, it's like you're seeing them in slow motion. So it's making the granularity of the voices and the pitch of the voices and the soulfulness of the voices even that much more apparent, like seeing a Usain Bolt run in slow motion.
AJ has a project called Tree, where he fucks with the shutter, but AJ rarely shows this piece because he thinks audiences feel like it's a chore to get through, and he is correct. Tree might be what we could consider a pure example of kineaesthetics, but it's some ass, just like the rhythm pictures, and I cannot have that. Kineaesthetics is very particularly about the expressive ways the mechanics of cinema, which are lens distortion, shutter angle, frame rate, post shenanigans, and how they can fuck with motion in conceptual but not abstract ways. And Tree does do this, but I think more broadly, vibration cinema is about, there has to be like a little funkiness to it, a little, playfulness to it. It has to be enjoyable and fun to watch. And I don't think, seriousness and playfulness are mutually exclusive, but Tree is not it. I think rigidity is good definitionally, but once you put these ideas out in practice, things necessarily loosen up. We cannot have these whack-ass movies be the face of kineaesthetics. I'm sorry. Black is King was really instructive in giving kineaesthetics some of its looser contours. I think Black is King shows why it's important to fold other movement arts to complement and support the fundamentals of kineaesthetics, for example, like costume and choreography. And these make watching it a much easier process, which I do think is very important. Because baby, if your movie is a chore to charge through, I will
cut the cameras. Dada.
Black is King is a narrative, a retelling of The Lion King, but it's also very much about a cultural dialogue among the diaspora, specifically about cultures of movement, specifically dance. And there has been discussion on how this is a misguided and appropriative attempt to do so. But despite the film being, morally or politically or culturally wrong, it is still articulate in its wrongness. And that's what's of interest here with kineaesthetics, the articulation. Through the manipulation of motion, Black is King can create an analogy of how cultures of movement are retained throughout the diaspora and the transatlantic slave trade. And it doesn't have to be so on the nose with it. It can be hinted at simply by cutting between a twirled umbrella and a spinning wheel, right? This is in a more metaphorical sense, the continuity of motion, right? Black is King might be misguided in what it is saying, but it is still saying it clearly and using motion as a major vehicle for that expression. That's what's important here. Black is King is also an ugly-ass movie, and its placid, sterile Nat Geo cinematography actually helped me figure out something that I've been meaning to express about cinematography for a while, which is that the graphic fidelity of an image is not much of a moniker of its quality. What is being expressed and how it is visually articulated is more important than how prettily the images are being captured. And the lighting and the lensing of Black is King is so sanitized, it looks like a compilation of calendar landscapes. But I think it's effective at expressing this idea about the retention of movement culture. And a lot of this sits at the intersection of choreography, shutter, and frame rate. In other words, kineaesthetics. Lastly, we're going to look at Catwoman. And this is the film where I sort of built the foundation of kineaesthetics on. The critical reception of this movie has been pretty consistent. When it came out, people were like, none of the decisions here make sense, so it's bad. And now that Twitter is reevaluating it, they're saying none of these decisions make sense, so it's camp. But of course, all of the decisions do make sense. It's just that people don't know how to read movies. Most of the team on this worked with Luc Besson on Fifth Element, so it isn't that they're incompetent, it's just that they're French. And the wacky stuff going on in Catwoman is using the camera to approximate the agility and nimbleness of a cat in a movie called Catwoman. It is still kind of corny, yeah, sure, but it's not without reason. And we've discussed the relationship between kineaesthetics and the kinogloss, and Catwoman exemplifies this link nicely in the POV shots where the camera moves as if it were a cat. All of this seems very obvious, so I don't know why it was lost on so many people, but this disconnect is what inspired me to talk about the art of movement in cinema, to put motion back in motion picture. Everyone is focused on narratives, story narratives, political narratives, these overarching kind of grandiose ideas about narratives, but nobody knows how to talk about images in a visual medium. And we can wax poetics about what the narrative is doing or what the character represents, but a lot of times this is undermined in the actual images. And at the end of the day, this is a visual medium, so it's super embarrassing how elementary our understanding of images are when we talk about cinema. All of what we've discussed is already part of the cinematic vernacular, but nobody uses this language because the grip narrative has over the medium. So at its core, kineaesthetics is a reminder that we do have avenues of expression outside of plot points and dramatic turns, especially since Blackness is a culture of movement. We're going to talk and look a little bit more closely at cinematography next year, but next up, I'm going to do my anti-realism rant But that's it for today. Thanks so much as always for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Love you all madly. Bye.